Well, imagine that you are sitting at home in your living room and everybody's gone out and you're watching the TV, and then suddenly you notice that your heart's going a little bit faster. And then you start to get a little bit afraid. And then suddenly out of nowhere you find you're struggling to breathe and your heart's going even faster. And this incredible feeling of dread is something absolutely awful is going to happen to you. And well, believe it or not, what's actually happening in that situation is that you're experiencing a panic attack. Now, if this happens to you for the very first time, it can be one of the most frightening things that ever happens to you, because you become absolutely convinced that something absolutely terrible is going to happen. In actual fact, all that's happening is you're experiencing really an acute anxiety state, which we call a panic attack. The panic attack, if they don't try to stop it, would settle down, but in the majority of cases, because people do try to stop it, it just continues. And when we get repeated episodes of this, we call it panic disorder. In other words, it's quite common. About 8% of the population may get this at some stage in their life, but about 5% of the population, unfortunately, will get this on a continuous repeated pattern, and we call this panic disorder. And it's one of the commonest mental health difficulties that we experience, and one of the ones that gives the greatest difficulties, and yet paradoxically is one of the easiest ones to manage with some proper CBT help. I think the biggest fear for the person with a panic attack, once they get used to having them to a certain extent, is when they're going to happen. They become absolutely, totally anxious all of the time. When is it going to happen next? Because they never get any warning. That's the problem. They happen out of nowhere. They could happen at work. They could happen at home. And I might have a break for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe 3 months. And I think they're gone away. And then bang, back it comes again. So we call this the fear of fears. I think this is the secret, really. I often say to people, well, what causes all these physical symptoms? And the person usually says, well, it's caused by the panic. And in many senses, they're actually correct. But you have to go a little bit deeper. What's going on actually in the body? Well, actually what happens is that our emotional brain is picking up a danger. And whenever the emotional brain picks up danger, it sends out signals basically to a gland in our tummy called the adrenal gland to release adrenaline. Now, adrenaline is our doer-runner hormone. It's one of our fight or flight hormones. So its job really is to really protect us. But what it actually does, it causes our heart to go faster, our stomach to go into knots. It causes a lot of the muscle tension to dry out. It causes the breathing to go much more quickly, and all of the other symptoms that we get in the panic attack. So all that's happening in the body is actually very simple. It's actually, as what we call an adrenaline rush. In my latest book, I call adrenaline the rocket fuel of the stress system. So it's really our stress system firing inadvertently, pouring adrenaline into the bloodstream that gives us all these symptoms. The biggest problem really is that if we did absolutely nothing in the middle of a panic attack, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but if you did absolutely nothing, your panic attack would be gone in 10 minutes, because that's the natural period of time that this adrenaline rush lasts for. But when we try to stop it, which is what almost everybody does, and we can stop it in all kinds of different ways, or try to stop it in all kinds of different ways. The commonest one, particularly for the first or second one, is that people end up in casualty. So maybe ambulances are called because the person thinks they're dying, or else they go looking for help and everybody else thinks that they're dying. So they end up down in the casualty, having all kinds of tests done, and then being told after a while, when everything has settled down, well, actually, you're totally physically well, there's actually nothing wrong with you. And of course that makes the person even more upset, because they're being told there's nothing wrong with them, and yet they've had this horrendous experience. The other things that people do is they try to do things like leave the area. So for example, if they're in a shopping centre, or in their say at home, they may go out into the garden, or they may go out into the fresh air. They'll try and leave the area. Many other people will go looking for help from friends. Other people will go they may try and find some tranquilizers. Other people may, for example, try breathing exercises. Even some people, I've even still got people trying to breathe into a brown paper bag. Now, unfortunately, all these things, whilst they might seem at first glance to be helping the situation, are actually making it worse. Because the more your emotional brain senses a danger, by you trying to do these things, the more you unfortunately perpetuate the panic attack. And in those situations, the panic attack can last for hours. Well, we have a great exercise that we do. We get you to imagine during a panic attack that you're stuck to the ground. Imagine that I put glue under your feet. And what actually happens in those situations is that the person begins to immediately feel slightly panicky. My God, you're telling me that I can't move. Because the only relief I get is when I actually move around. But what I actually want the person to do is to actually experience something called flooding. Now, flooding is a kind of a new way of looking at panic attacks. We now know, for example, that there is no danger associated with panic attacks. So what we actually do is we explain to the person that there is no danger. And I often give the example of a time when I was out in Africa and I met a leopard. And I explained what happened to me during that and how my adrenaline fired. And when I went back to the house after doing a runner, 10 minutes later, everything began to settle down. So I explained to the person that that's exactly what's going to happen to them in this situation. That if they actually imagined they were stuck to the ground and they let the symptoms flood over them, there's a lovely way of saying, come on, let's have you, do your worst. By experiencing the symptoms, okay, and we'll talk about the amygdala now in a minute, but by experiencing these symptoms and letting them happen, what actually happens is the emotional brain begins to see there's no more danger. And it then looks around, sees there's no danger, and actually begins to turn off the tap. So the adrenaline begins to settle down, and the symptoms begin to settle down. And that'll happen within 5 to 10 minutes. So by doing nothing, absolutely nothing, imagine you're stuck to the ground. So sitting down, letting it happen, letting them flood over you, and they're gone. And a lovely way of looking at that is, trying to stop a panic attack is like trying to go down to the sea, put up your hand and stop the tide. The tide is going to come in, but the tide is going to go out. So if you can imagine that idea in your mind, that all that's going to happen is you're going to get this whoosh of adrenaline and then it's going to clear away. But remember, it's the function of our stress system to protect us, not to kill us. So all these dangers that people have, that they're going to die, that they're going to get a heart attack, that they're going to run amok, these are dangers that people have, that they're going to lose control, that they're going to go mad, or that people will see them, are all kind of just visualized dangers in our mind. The body looks for danger, and when it sees danger in any form whatsoever, it fires. And once it fires, you get adrenaline, but the adrenaline will come and go in a rush and be gone. And this, we know, is incredibly effective at eliminating panic attacks. And there's a second thing that I get people to do. When I get them to understand that panic attacks are actually simply an adrenaline rush, uncomfortable but not dangerous. Uncomfortable but not dangerous. Very important. The symptoms of panic attack are very uncomfortable, but they're not dangerous. What you get them then to do is to visualize going into crowded areas and try to bring them on, which is completely kind of counterintuitive, because the person says, oh my God, you're asking me to go into a very busy place and bring on a panic attack. But the whole point of this is that our emotional brain will do the opposite of what you want it to do. So, for example, if I say to you, don't think of a pink duck on top of your head, you'll automatically think of a pink duck on top of your head. So whatever you tell the emotional brain to do, it's very bold, it'll do the opposite. So the whole point of this is to try to get the person to lose their fear of fears. By bringing them on, they're now back in control. Because in practice, they can't bring them on. They really struggle to do this. So they begin to get feeling this greater sense of control over the situation. And this is an incredibly effective approach. I think one of the most exciting developments for me, and in my latest book, Flagging Anxiety and Panic, I for the first time maybe bring the amygdala to the attention of everybody in the sense of its importance in the management of panic attacks particularly. And part of the difficulty is that the amygdala is a very ancient organ which is in control of our stress system. So it sits there almost like a little guy in a watchtower, and it's busy out there looking at all of the environment, looking for danger. So it's the guy, for example, that fires every time you think you see a mugger, every time, for example, you know, a bee comes near you, do you know what I mean? And you feel, my God, I'm going to get stung. So you find yourself automatically moving out of the way. It's your amygdala firing because it's recognizing danger. So its job is to recognize danger. That's its complete function. But this organ is completely stupid and completely thick. And he doesn't really understand any kind of talk therapy. So you can't really talk to this organ. And the book explains really that he's very much the gunslinger, do you know what I mean, of our stress system. So what actually happens in a panic attack is if the amygdala, the first thing that happens to you is you begin to get some physical symptoms. The amygdala senses that there's a problem because you're now beginning to feel that something terrible is going to happen. You think you're going to die, you think you're going to lose control, you think you're going to go mad. So the amygdala senses that you picked up a danger. So it automatically fires because that's its job. And once it fires, it leads to this adrenaline rush. And we now know that the amygdala only responds to this form of flooding that we talked about. This whole idea of letting these symptoms come, letting them swamp over you. And in the book I try to explain really how the amygdala does this and what its functions are. So the amygdala is the key player. And the great thing is we know that when you expose the amygdala to the danger, by allowing by accepting these symptoms as uncomfortable but not dangerous, the amygdala then begins to realize, hey, there isn't really a danger here. So it begins to switch off. So once you get the amygdala turned down or switched off, your panic attacks settle down and go away. And the great thing about this approach is that I would say that we can deal with most cases of panic attacks and have them gone in about maybe 1 to 2 sessions. So that's a very exciting possibility for many people who have these for many, many years. And many people end up using, say, drug therapy, do you know what I mean? Maybe in some cases they're even put on antidepressants, which in the majority of cases is not really necessary at all unless they have depression. So what I would really appeal to people is that some very simple CBT exercises, like this flooding, do you know what I mean, can be incredibly effective at teaching you how to get rid of these. And in general, try to avoid taking drug therapy for this condition because it's a very simple condition that shouldn't really require it. And I would say to people listening to this, there's a message of great hope here. You know, it doesn't matter how long you've had your panic attacks, it doesn't matter how severe they are, it doesn't matter under what circumstances you're getting it. The application of some of these very simple principles can have a hugely transformative effect on your life and get rid of panic attacks out of your life forever.